This is Chairperson Polly, Sacramento County Planning Commission, July 27th, 2020, calling the meeting to order. We have a brief announcement. In compliance with directives of the county, state, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this meeting is live streamed and closed to the public. Temporary procedures are subject to change pursuant to guidelines related to social distancing and minimizing person-to-person contact. To make a verbal comment at today's meeting, dial 916-875-2500 and follow the prompts to be placed in queue for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter. Callers will be transferred from the queue into the meeting to make a verbal comment on a specific agenda item or off-agenda item. Each agenda item queue will remain open until the public comment period is closed for that specific item. Written comments are always accepted. Send your email comment to boardclerk@saccounty.net or make a comment online at bozpublicmeetings.saccounty.net. Your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record. If we could take roll, please.
Commissioner Martinson?
Here.
Commissioner Poley?
Here.
Commissioner Hom?
Here.
Commissioner Tatishi?
Here.
Commissioner Shelby?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. If you would like to swear in anyone who is planning to speak or present this evening.
Yes, I believe we have the applicant on the line for item number 2. And please raise your right hand and the appropriate response is I do. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give this commission is the truth, so help you God? If you do not swear, do you so affirm?
I do.
Please state your name for the record in the statement I have been sworn when you are requested to speak.
I'm sorry, did you want us to do that now or at the time of the...
No. When your item is called and when the chairperson requests or if the commissioners have any questions for you and they'd request information from you.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Could we call the first item, please?
Item number 1, workshop on 2021-2029 housing element. Environmental document is not applicable.
And do we have a presentation from staff?
I believe,
Alma, are you pulling up the PowerPoint for us?
Yes, it's up
Excellent.
now.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the County Planning Commission. My name is Kate Rose, and I'm an Associate Planner with the Office of Planning and Environmental Review. I'll be presenting the 2021-2029 Housing Element Workshop tonight. After my presentation, we'll have time for questions on the content of the presentation, and then I believe we'll move to public comment and discussion. Tonight, I'll go over these topics shown on this overview slide. What is a housing element? The chapters of the housing element, housing affordability, recent legislation, the regional housing needs allocation, our project timeline, draft programs, questions, and then the discussion questions. So a housing element is one of the 8 elements of that California law requires us to include in our general plan. State housing law requires cities and counties to use the housing element to plan to meet the housing needs of all income groups. The county's housing element update will cover an 8-year period of 2021 through 2029 and will result in modifications to the current 2013-2021 housing element to address the changing needs of county residents as well as changes to state housing law. The housing element is the only element which must be certified by the state, and that's state HCD. We must report to the County Board of Supervisors as well as the state annually on our progress toward meeting housing element goals. Generally speaking, housing elements guide the preservation, improvement, and development of housing. Next slide. This is a list of the housing element chapters. I'll just go over each of them briefly. Within the housing element, we include a chapter that evaluates past performance. In this chapter, we assess the county's progress in implementing the policies and programs set forth in the prior housing element. In the housing needs assessment, we provide demographic and housing need information. The next several slides will include housing affordability data that we've collected as a part of this chapter. The constraints analysis chapter analyzes governmental constraints, such as permitting, procedures, fees, and non-governmental constraints, such as land costs and construction costs, to the development of housing. The sites inventory and analysis chapter identifies sites available for housing development in order to accommodate the county's RHNA, or the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Housing resources chapter identifies financial and other resources available to support housing development, especially affordable housing. The Goals, Policies, and Programs chapter establishes new policies and programs and amends existing policies and programs to address the housing needs. Generally speaking, the goals define the endpoint we want to reach to address identified housing needs. The policies are the course of action we want to take to guide decision making, and the programs are the specific actions that we will take to implement a policy and achieve our goals. This evening, we will focus on new programs that we've developed because they're really where the rubber meets the road, and because we report on them annually to our board and state HCD. Next slide. This table shows the affordability of housing in Sacramento County in relation to income using HCD 2020 income limits and Zillow data for the entire county, including the cities. Income categories are organized in relation to the area median income. So households in the low income category make less than 80% of the area median income. For example, in Sacramento County, a household of 4 making less than $69,000 a year is considered low income. This table lists the monthly rent and home purchase prices that would be affordable to each income category based on their estimated income as compared to the median rent or home sales price. For example, a very low income family of 4 could afford to a rent of $1,079 and a home sales price of about $185,000, but both the median rent and the home sales price are much higher. The next several slides illustrate this gap between what is affordable and what the actual median price points are. Next slide. Here's another visualization of the data for home sales. I've highlighted the gaps between what would be affordable and what the median sales price is. For an extremely low income household of 4, the difference between the median home sales price and the affordable price was quite high, almost $250,000. For very low income, the difference was $181,000 and $181,000, sorry. And for low income, the difference was $70,698. Next slide, please. Here's the data for rental prices. For an extremely low income household of 4, the difference between the median rent and an affordable rent was $1,265 per month. For very low income, the difference was $834, and for low income, the difference was $187. While Sacramento has been hailed as relatively affordable when compared to the rest of the state, we see through these graphs and charts that it is not affordable to lower income households. This issue will be exacerbated by the pandemic as unemployment rates remain high and federal insurance runs out. Next slide, please. People in the lower income categories hold a wide variety of occupations in Sacramento County, such as food service, healthcare support, farming, and retail. Those in the extremely low income category are typically those on fixed incomes and are not likely to be in the workforce full time. Next slide, please. Since adoption of the prior housing element, the state legislature has passed several packages of bills in response to the statewide housing crisis. The bills on this slide reflect just a few key bills from the 2017, 18, and 19 legislative seasons, which require additional analysis to be included in the current housing element. AB 879 made changes to the requirements of the Constraints Analysis chapter, as well as the annual reporting that we provide to the state. We now need to track the requests to develop housing at densities below that anticipated in our housing element, and the length of time between approval and submittal of application for building permits. AB 1397 restricts the parcels which can be included in our site's inventory and analysis chapter. The intent of this bill was to keep local governments from parking sites on their inventory for multiple housing element cycles, or for including sites which lack access to infrastructure. We have prepared a draft program consistent with guidance from HCD in order to allow us to use some of the parcels that we used in previous cycles. AB 686 requires that public agencies take actions which affirmatively further fair housing. This means actions that foster inclusive communities, address segregated living patterns with integrated living patterns, transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. Per this bill, we need to include an assessment of fair housing within our housing element. We will be able to use the analysis of impediments to fair housing that Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency brought to the board for adoption in October 2019. The analysis of impediments includes a wealth of data related to segregated living patterns, and it also includes a list of actions that the county committed to take to affirmatively further fair housing. The legislature has also been interested in incentivizing ADUs. SB 13 stipulates that certain accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, are exempt from development impact fees. We included this bill here for your reference because we've developed several complementary draft programs which we hope will further incentivize ADUs. Next slide. As a part of the housing element process, the state gives each regional body, known as Councils of Governments, or COGs, the number of housing units each region must plan for. The COGs then break down the total number of units into income categories, and they give each city and county their fair share of the regional number. Each city and county is required to show that it can accommodate its share of the units for each income category. We accomplish this through zoning. We need higher density sites, such as RD30 and higher, in order to provide housing that is affordable to lower income households. Sacramento County is within the 6-county region of the Sacramento Area County Council of Governments, or SACOG, and Sacramento County's total RENA for the year 2021 through 2029 is 21,272 units. The county does not currently have enough appropriately zoned land to meet the RENA requirement for the lower income levels for the planning period. Therefore, our office is working on a countywide rezone program to increase the amount of high-density residential sites in the county. Next slide, please. The county's housing element update must be certified by the state by May 2021. In order to meet this deadline, we began public outreach in spring of 2020. We will prepare the draft housing element by fall of 2020. Following this workshop, we will give a presentation to the Board of Supervisors, likely in September or October. We hope to meet again with members of the public and stakeholders in fall of 2020 to get feedback on the draft element. Then we will take the final housing element to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors for adoption prior to receiving state certification in May 2021. In response to COVID-19, we transitioned all in-person workshops to online webinars. We hosted 1 informational webinar and 2 interactive webinars. The informational webinar was recorded in English and Spanish and posted to the Housing Element webpage. The interactive webinars were held on May 13th in the morning and May 23rd in the evening. We had quite a few people registered for these webinars, however, actual attendance was low. In order to get additional feedback, we added 2 surveys to our website. Both surveys were available in multiple languages. We also hosted 5 focus group meetings with key community stakeholders, which were well attended. The focus group meetings covered the following topics: housing for people with disabilities, housing goals, policies and programs, barriers to housing and services for people experiencing homelessness, housing for farm workers, and housing for seniors. A summary of the feedback that we received during the focus group meetings and interactive webinars is provided in the staff report package as attachment 1. Next slide, please. The next several slides are draft housing element programs that we outlined in the staff report. There are more draft programs provided in attachment 2. There are also several programs from the current 2013-2021 housing element, which we will either carry forward to the new element as is, amend and carry over to the new element, or remove from the new element based on their effectiveness. For a complete list of the 2013-2021 housing element programs, please see attachment 3. In addition to those programs which we listed in attachment 2, I want to note that we've been working on several other programs related to topics like tenant protections, missing middle housing, homelessness, and community outreach and education related to affordable housing. The current slide shows the Affordable Housing Amendment Option 1 program. The existing affordable housing ordinance allows residential developers to either pay an affordability fee, dedicate land, or develop affordable housing to meet their obligation. During our focus group meetings, our stakeholders commented that the county needs additional local funds for affordable housing. They also commented that the county should amend the affordable housing ordinance to include a mandatory inclusionary housing component. We have 2 draft programs related to the affordable housing ordinance. Option 1 states, the county will perform an evaluation of the effectiveness of the affordable housing ordinance by 2023 to determine if it's building affordable housing at the rate anticipated at the time of adoption. We have 9% here, but I believe it's actually 10%. My apologies for the error. Based on the outcome of the evaluation, the county will consider amendments to the affordable housing ordinance to increase the amount of affordable housing units built in the county. So through this program, staff would assess the current fee to determine if it's delivering the amount of housing that was anticipated at time of adoption. Then we would prepare amendments as needed. At the time of the adoption of the original ordinance, or the current ordinance, staff set an affordability fee that we estimated would produce affordable units at 10% of the market rate units. Next slide, please.
Oh. No, I think that was it.
Oh, sorry, previous slide. Thank you. This is option 2. Option 2 reads, the county will consider amendments to the affordable housing ordinance to increase the amount of affordable housing units built in the county. Potential amendments include increasing the affordable housing fee or including a mandatory inclusionary component. The main difference between option 1 and 2 is that option 1 focuses on evaluating the ordinance, and option 2 focuses on either amending the affordable housing fee, either changing the affordable housing fee or amending the ordinance to include a mandatory inclusionary component. Next slide. In order to further incentivize ADU development beyond the provisions of SB 13, PER drafted this program, which would allow property owners to choose an ADU, which has already been approved for construction. The program states the county will accelerate production of ADUs by providing a complete set of construction drawings consisting of architectural renderings, structural, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical plan for 3 different sized ADUs. PER will work with the Office of Development and Code Services, Building Permits and Inspections, to identify a process for utilizing these construction drawings thereby saving time and applicant costs during the plan check process. Next slide. Stakeholders expressed interest in amendments to the county's affordable housing fee deferral and waiver program. The existing program applies to impact fees, including the Antelope Public Facilities Financing Plan area fees, North Vineyard Station specific plan area fees, and Sacramento County Transportation Development fees. Through the existing program, projects with at least 10% of units with rents affordable to very low income households, or 49% of units with rents affordable to low income households, may apply for fee deferrals or fee waivers. The annual cap for waivers is set at either 200 dwelling units or 5% of the residential permits issued in the previous year, whichever is greater. There are also several other fee waiver and fee deferral programs with similar restrictions. Stakeholders commented that the fee waiver cap should be increased or that additional fees should be waived and deferred to encourage affordable housing. Our draft program states, in order to facilitate the development of affordable housing units, the county will consider adopting amendments to the existing affordable housing fee deferral and waiver program, or adopting additional fee waiver or fee deferral programs. Next slide. Pursuant to AB 1397, the county must include a program in its housing element which allows affordable housing developments as a by right use on sites listed on our previous land inventories. In order to ensure that affordable housing developments are allowed by right on these sites, the zoning code must be amended to remove the conditional use permit requirement for multifamily projects over 150 units. This program was drafted based on guidance from HCD. The program states that the county will amend the zoning code to ensure that developments in which 20% or more of the units are affordable to lower income households are allowed by right on vacant sites identified in the 4th and 5th cycle housing elements, and non-vacant sites identified in the 5th cycle housing element, even if the development exceeds 150 units. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer questions. We also have other members of the housing element team here to answer questions, including Leanne Moffitt, Todd Smith, Leanne Mueller, and Christy Grabo. Following any questions that you have, we have 2 discussion questions to help facilitate a conversation about the draft programs. Thank you.
Commissioners, are there questions for staff?
I have a question. This is Commissioner Martinson. I know SB 2, which was passed a few years back, was initially dedicated or focused on homelessness issues, but I was wondering if staff has done any analysis or prediction about how much that new source of funding will help and how much we anticipate to receive, sort of based on what they've maybe, I think this might be the first year or the second year that that's been collected from those recording fees.
We have an answer for you. I'm going to let Leanne Mueller take that.
Hi, Kara.
Okay.
So what happened is earlier in about January, we received, the state sent out a notice of funding availability for those funds, and we did end up going through and doing everything that was required for that. So what we ended up doing is we're allocating about $300,000 to to prevent homelessness, specifically with regard to seniors, and then the remaining funds are going into the housing trust fund for multifamily units, and then we're also doing about 20+% of that to first-time buyer down payment assistance programs. And in addition to that, we have to also give some funds to 3 of our 3 cities that are also required to get funds for that. So we did actually submit that grant application ahead of its due date, which was July 27th, and we have not heard back yet, but we're hoping that we will hear back pretty shortly because we also worked with SHRA, and I think they're anticipating using those funds as part of their advertising and their programs as well.
So that's the PLHA grant is the name of that one.
Okay. So is that just the first phase and is as a competitive grant process? And if so, is the second phase, which I know there's sort of more focus on direct funding to local government specifically for affordable housing, is that an allocation process or is that also a competitive grant process moving forward?
Yeah, the PLHA was not competitive per se.
Okay.
The county just got the money, and it was a 5-year plan. And the 20% home buyer assistance was required. The funding to Folsom Island and Galt was required. But we did set aside some for homeless specific. That's the $300,000 a year for the first 5 years.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to get at and understand, and maybe it's too early to know yet, is, obviously it's a fluctuating funding source because it's based on that fee, that $75 fee or up to $225. Do we have any sort of expectation or understanding of what we'll receive sort of on an annual basis from that, and how that kind of helps us?
Yeah, there's actually another larger funding source for homeless, and I'm sorry, it is escaping me right now, that is not coming in through planning. The planning is not directly involved in, but the county is, where we were getting a much larger source of funds for homeless. Let me see if I can find that dollar amount.
So I think to answer your question, Kara, I think roughly the estimation when the NOFA came out was that over the 5-year period, it would be about $16 million in funding. But of course, that came out in January. So honestly, we don't know if that's what it's going to actually end up being, given everything that's going on in the current climate.
Yeah, I understand.
But they
I know. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but the estimation when it came out was that it would be $60 million over an approximate 5-year period. So that's roughly what it was.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I know I haven't been following it as closely lately, but I think in the last budget and then in this, there's state budget, there's more specific funding to homelessness, but it was my understanding that SB2 was kind of geared towards affordable housing and really helping us bridge that gap. And it sounds like all the programs that you listed really are in line with that. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions, commissioners?
This is Commissioner Hom. I guess I have a question or a statement per se. I'm just wondering on this housing development plan, is there some way to strongerly, is there such a word, encourage developers to actually do affordable housing development, like actually build it versus just putting into a fee? Because quite candidly, given the choice, pay a fee or actually build it, it's a lot less heartburn just to pay into a fee because development has a certain amount of heartburn to it, but it really doesn't accomplish anything. All you're doing is actually putting in the fund, and construction costs go up every year. So really, as Kate, as what you comment to and programs, where the rubber hits the road is actually products being built for affordable housing versus dollars put into a fund or lands allocated, which is important, but people can't live in a fund or raw land. I'm not sure if that's quite a statement or a question, but is there something in the program that really incentivize a developer to build versus just put into a fee?
So this is Leanne Moffett. I'll go ahead and try that one, having probably more historical experience with the inclusionary / affordable housing ordinance over the years. The county in the past did have an ordinance that was more inclusionary in nature. And particularly in the last economic downturn, the development interests made a pretty compelling argument that it was very difficult for them to actually build the inclusionary. So the county board decided to go to more of a fee program. And that is why I think Kate in her presentation sort of articulated the two options, and we're looking for feedback from the Planning Commission on which of those two policy statements you prefer. One is a little bit stronger about exploring more of an inclusionary program per se. I have a couple other thoughts here. One is in some of our existing communities where we're trying to build out, we are still having the development industry continue to make a fairly compelling argument that because the infrastructure costs are so high, they're still challenged, and they still really want to retain that fee option instead of an inclusionary option. So, that would be quite the point of discussion, I think, if we try to go more to inclusionary. Having said that, in the master plans, specifically where we are negotiating master plans in some cases with development agreements, and we are asking for a combination of land and money. So while that's not necessarily inclusionary per se, we are trying to make sure that we get a chunk of money along with land in those master plans so that we can turn the money into actual affordable development in the same general geographic location as the new market rate development. I'm not sure if that gets to all of your questions, but those are some of my initial thoughts at least.
Thanks, Leanne. I hear you clearly, and I understand the challenges to the development community because you're right, infrastructure costs is costly, especially if there is no infrastructure to support a piece of land. But at the same time, if we're serious about providing affordable housing, it's got to get built, just not put into a fund or have raw land available, again, which is all important. And I'm not sure I have, I know I don't have the answer, but I think if we're going to make a serious dent on affordable housing, something needs to get built versus just a fee or land donated, or right. I should say contributed. I should say donate, but contributed.
Yeah, and I will say we do take the money and we do turn it into affordable housing. We have been expending funds as Housing and Redevelopment Agency on the county's behalf does take those fees and does turn it into affordable housing. It's definitely relates to the amount of market rate housing that gets built, how much money we get. And then I think there are some other minor tweaks that we didn't really cover in the presentation that we would like to look into, including the owner-builder exemption is one of the items where we have this owner-builder exemption, and we see a lot of smaller projects come in and utilize that. And so that's one of the things we may want to discuss when we get to the ordinance. But we're not trying to do the ordinance concurrently with the housing element.
Right. And I'll just make this comment. I know probably one of the biggest frustration with the development community is on projects like this is the amount of time to get through the process per se. So right. To the extent the county with planning, building, and public works and all that is able to facilitate. I use the term quite sparingly when I say fast track, because we don't want to necessarily fast track at the peril of a quality development. But there's one of the frustrations with any development team is, oh my goodness, how long does it take to get a permit before I can turn dirt? So I think sometimes that's even more important than the fee itself.
So, and in that point, we do have a big push this next year with some of our grant money coming in to really look at housing and how to continue to facilitate both by right and streamlining housing development. So we have a fair amount of money coming in from state grant funds, really digging in and looking at that. And does anyone else have on the team? I might give anyone else an opportunity to add if they have anything else to say on that topic.
Yeah, this is Todd Smith. I'd like to just add one little piece, Alan, to your question about whether we're in contact with any developers to actually produce housing. We do have affordable housing, that is. We do have conversations periodically with affordable housing developers. In fact, some of us on the team had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with Link Housing. And and I know Kate and others had some early outreach in the last probably 18 months or so with both market rate developers and affordable housing developers to try to identify what those constraints that they experience are to help improve our processes. And we also wanted to let them know, and we continue to let them know, of any potential sites that may available that come across our desk through our various work programs. So we're constantly looking for ways to produce, and we try to engage with the builders as often as we can.
Thank you. Well, I can say that my experience with county staff on the stuff I do, the staff I dealt with has always been very, I should say, proactive and helpful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion, commissioners? All right, thank you so much for this presentation. Do I understand that this was informational only? We don't need to take action?
Kate, you have a couple of discussion questions for the group where we did want some specific feedback. So let's, if with your permission, go to that next.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have 2 questions for discussion. The first question is provided 2 options for draft program 1. Which of the 2 options do you prefer? And again, that's the program related to the affordable housing ordinance.
Could you recap those really quickly just so that we have it fresh?
Yeah, Alma, do you want to go to the affordable housing ordinance amendment slide? Is that possible?
Could you tell me which slide number that is?
12.
Hey,
12 and 13.
You guys hear me though? I had a question before we get to the next.
Oh yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Have we benchmarked against any other? Is there any county that's doing this well in terms of building affordable housing? You look across Sacramento, across the state.
Generally speaking, not really. The housing crisis is statewide, and there's only like a handful of jurisdictions which have met their RHNA in the past cycle. And when I say a handful, I mean like 13.
And they tend to be very small or wealthy or jurisdictions with not very high numbers.
Correct.
Okay.
There
are
are
they doing anything different than we're doing? When you break it down, I know they're small, but have you looked at actually what they're doing?
The jurisdictions that have met the regional housing needs application usually do not mimic anything that look like Sacramento County. It's like, was it like Hollywood had like 3 units or something, and I don't remember who. They don't bear a lot of relationship. Now there may be admittedly some jurisdictions who are more aggressive with regard to like inclusionary housing, or have other bond measures or other sources of funds. Because a lot of it is about the money. So, those more alternative sources of funds certainly can help. They're not necessarily things that we see that the county has, tools that the county readily has available.
That would be actually, this is Kara, that'd be an interesting comparison. And I'm sure the former state associate, my former employer, State Association of Counties, might have some of the information about which counties have dedicated or passed any kind of tax measure, and if that's really helped filling the gap, or what funding sources are out there. I mean, I'm sure you guys through APA and the Planning Directors Association talk about that regularly, but it'd be interesting to see if there's any compiled information.
So we do have that. We don't have it right here. We did look into that, yes, and look into coming up with alternative sources of funds. However, given the current economic climate, that doesn't seem terribly realistic or feasible right at the moment.
I understand.
So this is Commission. Yeah. Please, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
No, that I'm done.
This is Commissioner Polly. So, are all of these deed restricted? I recall looking at this a number of years ago, and for a unit to be considered affordable, it either needed to be, if it was resold, it had to be resold significantly below market, so the homeowner did not participate in the equity growth that other homeowners would, or if they were rental units, they were in essence rent controlled. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so when we say affordable housing, we typically mean housing that is deed restricted. And one of our prior versions, a much older version of our affordable ordinance, did allow construction of for sale units. It did have provisions in that. I think we had a handful sold. It wasn't, it's an expensive program to run, and wasn't very popular. And the owner does eventually receive some equity to the extent that they're in the home for a longer period of time. They would get an increasing share of the equity over time. But the pool of buyers who were in the target where they could afford the loan, but it was that they really needed it to be the affordable price, was a very tiny pool of buyers. For a lot of people, it was just better to buy a home where they got 100% of the equity right away. The savings wasn't that great. So it was a challenge for the handful of developers that we worked with a decade ago or so to find the appropriate type of buyer for those for sale units.
Yeah, so one of the concerns I've had about what in California we call affordable housing, which is not, it's subsidized housing, it's subsidized in a non-direct tax manner because other homeowners pay for this, which is the math. It's why developers have such a struggle in building market rate housing and subsidizing additional housing. So I think this discussion about not just what are our options and how do we deal with this, but does anything ever really happen? I mean, unless the math problem gets solved, nothing will actually happen. So as we look at the two options for discussion, I'm certainly going to look at them with an eye toward what's effective versus just an additional exercise.
Right, and that's where some of the other things like accessory dwelling units come in, because those are not deed restricted. You know, that's a way of increasing just overall housing supply. Some of the small lot product that we see built is more, I guess one of the terms is affordable by design, or more moderate income, that missing middle. That's the more, affordable to folks at more that the higher levels of low income or the lower levels of moderate, versus the more subsidized housing where, particularly at those extremely low income levels, those people definitely need assistance.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Commissioners, other discussion before we go through the two options? Thank you. Okay, so if we could just quickly recap option number one, which I see on the screen.
Option number one is the one that basically asks staff to do an evaluation of the effectiveness of the affordable housing ordinance and determine if it really is a 10% program, which is what we thought it was at the time of adoption based on our analysis of the cost of developing affordable housing units. And then based on that evaluation, the county will consider amendments to somehow increase the amount of affordable units being built in the county.
So we don't know what those amendments would, I guess basically what we're saying is we have a high probability of this not being successful. We'll measure it, and in 3 years we'll say it's not successful, and then we'll be in the same position we're in right now, which is trying to figure out how to make it successful.
Well, we actually right now haven't even done enough of analysis to know whether we're really getting 10% out of our current ordinance. So that's what this would have us do. It would have us really dig in and see whether we're producing at the 10% level or not, and then make adjustments if we're not.
Thank you.
And then next slide for option 2. So this option kind of skips straight to potential amendments that we'll consider, including updating the fee or including some sort of mandatory inclusionary component in the ordinance itself.
And so you're looking for the commission's recommendation about which of those 2 paths to take at this point in time?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, input?
I'll jump in. This is Kara. You know, I think evaluation is really important because it's even if, you know, even if you have a feeling, it's important to do sort of the analysis to validate that and have data to prove it. So I'm definitely inclined to do analysis. But what I'm interested in also exploring, and maybe it can be done concurrently, is, you know, the inclusionary component, you know, it's not without, you know, its level of controversy, but it also has a direct impact and result. But as you, I think it was Leanne mentioned, there's compelling cases for how it can't be successful in certain economic conditions, or it's very difficult. So I was wondering if there's been any analysis or thought put into developing triggers for potential solutions based on the current economic climate that we're in, and really kind of as we evaluate what we're doing and thinking about making amendments moving forward, think about how those could be a variety of solutions, maybe not just the inclusionary component, be triggered, so to speak, so that they can have the best chance of success. Because the last thing we want to do is suggest amendments, but then obviously we're in a very uncertain time. It's really hard to predict what the future, frankly, is going to look like, and so we need to be able to adapt to our changing environment. So I know it's difficult to do that, but I'm just wondering if any, you know, if we could possibly study that at the same time we're also looking at our current ordinance and how effective it is.
Yeah, and I guess our thought was, you know, our focus right now is on getting the housing element done in the statutory deadlines, which is a lot of work. We have the rezone program that we're going to have to commit to, and that's going to take a fair amount of work, and we have some grant money coming in to do the rezone program. We also have grant money coming in to do this other focus on our processes, you know, that we need to work on, and the PLHA money. And then, so that's going to run for the next year or two. And then we were thinking we would follow that up with the ordinance, you know, maybe starting in a year, you know, in a year to 2 timeline, when staff is over some of these other near-term obligations, then we would go back in and look at that.
But that's a good point to make too, is that the housing element is an 8-year planning period. So I don't know if this is kind of what you meant by triggers, but we could always update or change the program language to have the analysis of inclusionary occur at a different year than 2023, when we feel that the economy is more likely to have recovered. So that is something that we've thought about.
So it sounds
Okay.
like option number one is probably the most viable of these two.
This is Alan speaking. I support what Commissioner Martinson was saying, because I think having appropriate data, you need that before you can make intelligent decisions or good decisions to move forward. At the same time, you don't want to analyze everything to death and then not get anything moving. So if there's some way to get data, but have some sort of triggers, because with the development community, if you hardline the inclusionary component, the community says, well, I'm just not going to build anything, and that doesn't accomplish anything either. So it's got to be. I'm not sure exactly what to tell you, other than we need to find a way to find analysis, see how much fight the development community could incur, so to get them to do the inclusionary, but not so much of a fight that they said, I'm just not going to do it because it's too much of a fight for me to take.
Right, that's really the debate when you get there. Yeah, have you hit the right sweet spot?
And I think you need some data to figure out what that fight is.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I agree.
This is Commissioner Shelby. I'll just kind of jump in. I'll share my lens. My lens is that, been on the commission about 5 years, and I feel like we haven't made a lot of progress in this area. In order for us to make progress, we have to be really intentional about what we do. It feels like waiting 3 years is a long time, and maybe there's something in the middle. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Without seeing the particular amendments we want to go do, I think that's a little bit, and benchmarking against some other localities that have had some success would be helpful. But to me, so when I look at option one, that's the only thing that sticks out. I look at it and say, hey, we're going to come back in 3 years, do some more analysis, and then we're still going to be in the same place we're in today. That's my one worry about option one.
Well, I guess building on that comment, and maybe I'm trying to understand sort of the process, because it sounds like you have a lot of new programs in the mix that you haven't figured out yet or done the analysis yet, if they're going to move the needle. Is that sort of the purpose of option one, is because you have these, what you just ran through with the ADUs and the other programs highlighted, that those are fairly new, don't really understand the impact of them on the ordinance yet, or how we would measure up with those all included?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we probably didn't really clarify is that we are actively working on updating our ordinance, which is the fee on the non-residential component. We didn't highlight that really in this presentation because we have grant funding and we're underway on that right now. The fee on our non-residential has not been updated forever. It has fallen way behind. It's not even indexed. So we have a consultant underway there, and we think that there's a lot of opportunity to look at that fee. So that is our near-term push right now, because it's been so long since it's been evaluated. The fee and that fee is also coming in very low. So, well, actually, it does provide
$200,000.
Yeah. We think there's a lot more upside potential with that fee. So that's why we're prioritizing that fee. And then we thought we'd come back and look at the residential one, because it has been looked at multiple times. It's been a little while, but not forever. And we are really focused on the other one initially, if that provides some context as well.
And then also just to chime in, for option one, we are wanting to complete the evaluation by 2023, not starting in 2023, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Understand.
So I'm sorry, I got a little confused. How does increasing fees cause things to be more affordable?
So basically, we a lot of times when a project comes in, the Housing and Redevelopment Agency acts on our behalf, and they pool the money, and someone will apply for these different pots of funds in order to build an affordable housing project. So we cobble the various sources of funds together to incentivize the construction of affordable housing. So things like Saybrook and the Courtyard Apartments that are just coming online. We've got the Stockton Boulevard site that's going out to RFP. We have the 46 and Lang project. This one on Stockton. So there are quite a number of affordable housing projects that we can point to that are either recently constructed or going through the process right now or coming up, where these fees are used to be pooled with other state and federal funds to build the deed-restricted affordable housing projects.
And what affordable housing developers will tell you is that they won't be competitive for state funding without a good amount of local match funding. And that local gap funding comes from two sources for Sac County. That's the Affordable Housing Ordinance, and then, like Leanne mentioned, the fee on non-residential development, which is known as the Housing Trust Fund.
And then some of this new PLHA money that we have coming up. So the more local gap funding we have, the more that the affordable builders in our region can successfully compete for available state and federal funds, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. Commissioners, are we ready to make a recommendation on option 1 or 2 or some variation?
I'll say this. I mean, I completely agree with Commissioner Shelby, and I can't imagine, being in the planner's shoes, because frankly, the state hasn't figured this out yet either. The price of affordable housing, it just keeps increasing, and especially in this climate, it's an impossible task to try and cobble together these funding sources. Yet at the same time, affordability rates are just like out of control, and our homeless situation is also sort of on the same trajectory. So it's almost an impossible task. That said, I mean, the task is in front of us, and so I do think we need to understand, and I'm a big fan of having data from which to base your decisions on, and that doesn't necessarily also have to come just from a evaluation of what we have in the queue, but looking to others, as Commissioner Shelby mentioned, and I know you guys have a lot of those resources and connections too, and so I think I am inclined to lean towards 1, but again, I just think we need to also be thinking about how to adapt what we're doing to kind of meet this environment that we're in. And I think the programs, and this is another impossible task, but the programs that, have been put forth in the past might not be effective and, useful in this day and age. And so trying to evaluate that as we're looking to what we're actually doing at the same time. So I guess it's maybe a combination of the both, but I know the workload in front of you is immense, and also trying to, update the ordinance. So focusing on, the evaluation of what we're doing, I think, is key, but also keeping your eye to what others are doing and how we can be more adaptive, I think, is important as well.
Thank you. I do see that we have two speakers from the public that would like to comment. This is our first time that we're having people call in. And so if the clerk could please set that up.
Commissioner Pulley, they aren't quite ready to come into the chambers yet, the calls. So if you'd like to finish your discussion for the options, and then in that time, we'll get the callers into the chambers.
Okay. Well, we did have a second discussion point as well. Commissioners, are we ready to move to the second discussion point and then hear from the public, or would you like to stay on these two options?
We can move on. We don't have to make a formal recommendation today, though, right? My understanding is it's a conversation, or do we need to make a formal recommendation? Looking at the packet we got, it looked like we needed to make a formal recommendation. Just want to get clarity on that.
Yeah, I think we're gearing up to have a similar workshop before the board in a couple months from now. And so we were just running a number of things past the Planning Commission. No, it's not a fully written element yet. It is an ongoing dialogue, but we appreciate any input that the Commission has.
Thank you. So then if we could go to the discussion, the second discussion point, if we could get that slide back up, please.
That is slide, that's the final slide. Okay. The second discussion question, per provided the housing element draft programs list, attachment 2. Are there any programs or topic areas which are not listed in attachment 2 that you would like per to explore further?
Commissioners? You know, I think if we don't have anything specific, it sounds like there's a bit of time where we could give some additional input on this as you're developing it. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. And
okay. Good, thank you.
Yeah, this certainly won't be the last time we're before the Planning Commission on this topic.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, I mean, I think it's the right area to look into. I think it's just, you know, how do we go about it? But I look at it, feels like the right area to be looking into on attachment 2.
Thank you,
Commissioner.
Yeah, this is Alan. I would say, you know, on attachment 2, you guys, staff has already touched on it. One of the things is the streamlining of the approval process. Again, I'll restate this comment. Is my experience with some of my clients. It's not supposed so much to the fee itself, is the amount of time it takes to get something approved. And if we can provide that, I think this being received by the development community could grow better legs, because you know, the worst thing is, oh my goodness, how long does it take to get this thing to get approval? And you know, like I said, my experience is the development community sometimes is okay to pay the higher fee as long as they can get it expeditiously moved forward.
Okay. Good comment.
So do we now have our public speakers?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. And will we ask each person to introduce themselves and affirm that they've been sworn in?
No. We only ask they state their name for the record, and that and how much time they have to make their public comment.
Okay, and we do have a 3-minute policy, and we will hold to that this evening. We do have a rather lengthy meeting tonight.
Yes, and we have a timer here in chambers that the caller will hopefully hear.
Great, thank you. Okay, could we have caller number 1?
Hello, caller.
Hello.
Please state your name for the record. Silence the meeting in the background on all devices. You have 3 minutes. Please start making your comment.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Ansel Lundberg. I am a co-chair of a group called House Sacramento. We are the local YIMBY group in Sac, Yes in My Backyard group. We represent tenants and folks in Sacramento who are affected by the region's housing shortage, and we fight for more infill housing and transit-oriented housing in Sacramento. So thank you again for allowing me to comment this evening. First, I want to say thanks to staff for a great presentation, and also for the extensive outreach efforts. We were one of the participating stakeholders in that, and that was excellent. We did a lot of education as well as opportunities for input. But I just wanted to call you this evening to speak on a few things that were discussed, and then just flag a couple other potential opportunities for the housing element update. So on the inclusionary element, a lot of what our thoughts are have been spoken to already this evening. You know, you have to take into consideration production. I think it could be good to provide that as an option. But as staff mentioned, the fee option is good because the affordable developers can leverage that with other funding sources. And then you also have to consider that, 10 or 25% of not very many units is still not a lot of units. So if it's, if there's a challenge to production, then this can be an additional burden to that. Also wanted to talk about the buy right process. We are in support of that. We're working on that with the city of Sacramento right now. Makes it easier to approve infill housing, avoids costly holdups, and that's on multifamily infill housing in the city. So I definitely suggest the county considers that. And lastly, there was a little bit of discussion of missing middle or kind of affordable by design housing products, so duplexes up to small apartment buildings. Definitely, we think the county should consider allowing these across the county, kind of increasing the base zoning level to a higher unit per acre minimum, or maximum, I should say. And, we've already discussed that many jurisdictions across the state are having challenges meeting their RHNA requirements. So allowing more types of affordable by design and missing middle housing across the county could be something that shows results in the next decade as this housing element is implemented. So thank you. Thanks again for allowing us to comment, and appreciate your work.
Thank you. And I believe we have another caller.
The county could be...
Hi, caller. State your name for the record. Silence the meeting in the background on all devices. You have 3 minutes. And please start making your public comment.
And appreciate your work.
Hello, caller.
Hi.
Please silence the meeting in the background on all devices.
Okay, thank you.
And please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes. Please start making your comment.
Thank you. Hi there. This is Matthew Bridges calling in from the Sacramento Food Policy Council. And just want to say, first off, thank you very much and appreciation for the dedication and the hard work of PER and all of the care put into the housing element so far. Part of the reason for this comment is really drawing the connection to some of the recent environmental justice efforts undertaken by the county. We did send in a comment letter to you all, and I just wanted to read a few paragraphs out of that letter for the record. So the environmental justice element, which was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in December of 2019, illuminated housing as an environmental justice issue, with safe and sanitary housing being one of the topical focus areas addressed. And commitments were made in that element to do, quote, an in-depth analysis of the presence of housing overcrowding in environmental justice communities and the causes of that overcrowding. As part of the next housing element, it's specified it would be part of the next housing element. It's concerning that housing needs for refugee and immigrant communities, large households in EJ communities, and Sacramento County tenants are not explicitly addressed in the 5 focus groups conducted by PER, although the last comment, the last speaker did bring up some of those concerns, which was great to hear. It is notable that these groups are more likely to experience a high rate of food insecurity, exacerbated by an economic recession of great proportions and an ongoing pandemic. Furthermore, we cannot overlook the looming potential for the displacement of thousands of renters countywide as emergency eviction moratoriums are lifted. This is the time to usher in input and leadership of the communities who are being most impacted. So PER's job is not an easy one. They are tasked with balancing the priorities of diverse and often conflicting stakeholder groups while striving to fulfill the vision of county elected and appointed bodies. We're concerned that despite dedication in their efforts to gather stakeholder input, that the voices, priorities, and vision from our most vulnerable and historically marginalized communities are not being included, as intended in the enacted legislation SB 1000, the Planning for Healthy Communities Act, and that PER is not necessarily being held accountable for their stated commitments to environmental justice. In January 2020, PER hosted a community stakeholder implementation meeting for the recently adopted EJ element, and some of us advocates from the Sacramento Food Policy Council presented a proposal for the chartering of an Environmental Justice Community Oversight Commission as a pathway to better support PER in fostering more trusting partnership and input with residents of EJ communities. And in our letter, which you all should have a copy of, there is an attachment with our proposal. So we ask for serious consideration of the concerns we brought forth to you and the pathway presented to address them. Ahead of us lies a critical opportunity to promote a more equitable and resilient county as we navigate some of our most trying times. We thank you for your consideration, and we do plan to follow up with some of you on the Planning Commission and have some further dialogue around our proposal. And just to note that there would be opportunity to make connections with the housing element. This commission that we're proposing isn't specific to the EJ element. However, that is the focus. So thanks again for hearing us out, and looking forward to your discussion.
Thank you. Commissioners, discussion or questions? Okay. So if I understand correctly, the discussion that we've just had, staff will take all of those considerations, certainly work through additional items, and then this will be an iterative process where we'll hear more as we go along. Did you need anything more definitive from the commission?
Not at this time, thank you. We were just looking for feedback, and you gave us some excellent considerations.
Thank you so
What's the
much.
timeline again? What was the timeline one more time?
So we need to adopt the element and get HCD sign off on the element, or HCD certification, by May 2021. So we are attempting to complete the draft element, including finishing up the programs that were before you and adding additional programs by fall of 2020. And then we're going to do additional outreach with stakeholders and members of the public in fall 2020. And then prior to going to the board for adoption in May, we will come back to the Planning Commission with the draft housing element for your consideration.
Thank you. Could we go to item number 2 then?
Item number 2, initiation of environmental review and reimbursement agreement located north of Interstate 80, east of Garden Highway, south of Fisherman Lake Slough, and west of the West Drainage Canal in the Natomas community. Environmental document not applicable.
We have a staff presentation.
We do. Good evening. I'm Todd Taylor. I'm an associate planner with Planning and Environmental Review. I'm just going to wait until the PowerPoint comes up.
Okay, I think we can see it now.
Okay. If we can go to the next slide. So this item is the Upper West Side Specific Plan Project, and the project is located in the Natomas community. The project area is generally bounded by Interstate 80 on the south, Garden Highway on the west, Fisherman's Lake Slough on the north, and the West Drainage Canal or Witter Canal on the east. This item is a request for a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and the request to the board is to direct staff to initiate the environmental review process and adopt the reimbursement agreement for the Upper West Side Specific Plan project. Please note that these two requests are not a recommendation to approve the actual specific plan, but they are steps in the process outlined by the county adopted master plan procedures and preparation guide. Next slide. To provide background information to your commission, in February of 2019, the Board of Supervisors voted to allow the initiation of the master planning process for the Upper West Side Specific Plan. And at the direction of the board, the county increased public outreach for the project, including mailing postcards and holding an open house and 4 neighborhood meetings in the surrounding areas of the project. A summary of these meetings was included as part of your packet. The applicant has since made revisions to the project, conducted preliminary studies, and in March of this year submitted a formal application to the county. The application included those entitlements that will be needed as part of the master planning effort. The application was deemed complete in May, and the application materials were also included as part of your packet. Most recently, the Natomas CPAC met in June of this year and voted to recommend the request. Next slide. The Master Plan Procedures and Preparation Guide breaks the county's master planning process into 4 phases. First is pre-application, second is initiation, third is preparation, and fourth is the hearing and adoption phase. At various points throughout the multi-year process, there are check-ins with the CPAC, the Planning Commission, and the Board of Supervisors to ensure that adequate outreach to the public and the hearing bodies occur. The step we are now at, which is the initiation of environmental review, is highlighted on this slide. Next slide. The Upper West Side Specific Plan, with the most recent proposed land use plan shown here, is proposed to include 2,066 acres with a 1,500 acre development area and a 500 acre ag buffer area, which is located along the west side of the specific plan area adjacent to Garden Highway. The development area would include over 9,000 dwelling units and 3 million square feet of commercial uses. Following my presentation, the applicant will discuss the proposal in more detail. Next slide. As shown in the previous slide, environmental review is part of the 3rd phase of the master planning process. Following the initiation, technical studies will be prepared, and an environmental impact report, or EIR, will be drafted to analyze the impacts of the Upper West Side project. The EIR will look at impacts related to transportation and traffic, biological resources, including the Natomas Basin Habitat Conservation Plan, and agricultural resources, as well as other topics. When the draft specific plan and EIR are complete, they will be brought before the CPAC and Planning Commission for a final recommendation. Next slide. The reimbursement of costs for the preparation of a specific plan are allowed pursuant to California state law, and reimbursement agreements have been adopted for other master planning efforts in the county. Typically, a reimbursement agreement is adopted along with a funding agreement at master plan initiation, and then a reimbursement fee is adopted after project approval. The already adopted Upper West Side funding agreement requires that the applicant pay for all upfront costs related to the preparation of a specific plan. The proposed reimbursement agreement would allow the applicant to recoup costs spent on the preparation of the specific plan from non-participating property owners when they decide to urbanize their properties consistent with a specific plan if it is adopted by the Board of Supervisors in the future. The reimbursement agreement sets the framework for reimbursement, but ultimately is up to the Board of Supervisors to set and adopt the reimbursement fee for after approval. Please note that the reimbursement agreement, the reimbursement to the applicant would not be using county funds. Next slide. By bringing the project to the CPAC and Planning Commission for a recommendation on the initiation of environmental review, and by including the most recent application materials, another opportunity for public input and review is being provided. The Planning Commission is being asked to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on whether to proceed with what has been proposed so far. Staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission is to approve the request and recommend that the Board of Supervisors direct staff to initiate environmental review and adopt the reimbursement agreement. That concludes staff's presentation, and I'm available for any questions, as well as John Lundgren, Senior Planner, and Todd Smith, Principal Planner.
Thank you. Commissioners?
I think I'll wait until after we hear from the applicant.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready to hear from the applicant then. Do we have their presentation loaded?
Yeah, good evening, Commissioners. Nick Aptis here with the Thomas Law Group on behalf of the Upper West Side Project. I have been sworn this evening. With me is our lead planner for our project, Tim Denham, with Wood Rogers. Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Sworn.
And I've been sworn in.
So, yeah, if we can just run through the slides here a little bit. We got a little bit of a presentation, so bear with us. I know there's a little bit of a lag between flipping the pages of the presentation, but we'll do the best we can. So go on to the next slide, please. I know during Todd's presentation, certainly provided a historical overview on the project. I think the important thing to underscore here is that the Upper West Side Project is part of what is known as the Natomas Joint Vision. As you see in this slide, there are several areas within the Natomas Joint Vision area that were identified as separate planning districts. The history of development planning in the Natomas area, in particular the Natomas Joint Vision area, goes back to the 90s. So we are the second master plan to submit a project application in this area. As Todd mentioned, he started with the application request in the fall of 2018. The Board of Supervisors approved an initiation of a master plan in February 2019. After 2019 and through today and on to the Board of Supervisors, obviously continuing a very robust outreach effort. One of the themes that was made fundamentally clear Board of Supervisors in 2019 is that the county does not want more of the same development. They would like to see something truly extraordinary, and that really is the bar that we have set for ourselves. Maybe go on to the next slide, please. Our project area, just to provide some perspective, is entirely within 5 miles of downtown, and you can measure that from the Sac Valley station, the train station, or the Golden One Center. Entirely within 5 miles of that. At our closest point, we're about 3.5 miles. Go on to the next slide, please. Our project really presents a unique opportunity to develop an area that is almost entirely surrounded by existing development. We are about 2/3 bordering the existing city limits of Sacramento, and as well the remainder, most of the remainder of our property boundary along Garden Highway, along built-out the Garden Highway community. We have some very unique characteristics of our project that we'll get into in a second. We'll go on to the next slide. But I did want to touch on our outreach effort in a little bit more detail. Certainly, our goal to make this project extraordinary really has permeated throughout every aspect of this project, and including outreach. This project is the only project, to my knowledge, that has engaged in such a extensive outreach effort this early on in the process. We haven't even begun environmental review, and our application was just deemed complete about a month ago. We've notified over 9,000 9,000 mailers going out as far as 2 miles. As the staff's presentation mentioned, we did have 5 community-wide meetings with hundreds of people attending. We've engaged with stakeholders at various levels and had countless meetings with staff, agency, and other property owners. So it really is a great effort that we have invested in terms of outreach. On to the next slide. I'll let Tim get into some of the specifics here, but I'm really excited about the prospects that this project holds to really be forward-thinking and truly exceptional in the region. Our project includes potential Los Rios Community College Vocational Training Center, net density of over 10 dwelling units to the acre. We are establishing significant sustainability goals and objectives as they relate to VMT and air quality and GHG. So with that, I'm going to hand the reins over to Tim Denham to kind of dig into the details of our plan a little bit.
Thank you, Nick. This is Tim Dunham with Wood Rogers, and we took the director from the County Board of Supervisors back in February of last year to create something special to heart. And there's 4 planning and design concepts that we've held near and dear through this process, and we'll continue to. If you could go to the next slide, I'll get into those in a little bit more detail as we move through this presentation. I will note a lot more details available in the application attachment that was submitted and is available online with the county. So our first concept was the Urban Town Center. We want to embrace density. We're visualizing something like Santana Row in San Jose with some vertically integrated development along the extension of West El Camino Avenue as our main street. As Nick noted, we're shooting for an average density of over 10 units an acre. Again, our goal is to meet or beat all of the 120 criteria. If you go to the next slide, please. And another key aspect of our design is the West Side Canal. We're trying to create a very unique urban waterfront experience where we have a trail and bike trail on either side of that and architecture fronting onto that. Examples that come to our mind are San Antonio River Walk in also the Bricktown Canal in Oklahoma City. Maybe one closer to home, although it is one-sided, is the Napa River, where you have that sort of development on. We view it as a really unique opportunity. If you go to the next slide, where folks can interact with that amenity, use it as a multiple function system with water quality, conveyance, and connectivity. At the northern portion of our plan, we're fortunate to have the Los Rios Community College owning a 108-acre site, and then the Thomas Unified School District also owning a substantial parcel, about 80. And we are proposing an educational node focused on workforce training. We've talked with Los Rios Community College. They're very interested in a 16-acre vocational training campus where students could essentially go through a K through 14 program, find in the field experiences with an ag tech campus focused around an urban farm, and opportunities for students to get their hands dirty, in the ag buffer that's further to the west. If we could go to the next slide, please. We also have a very extensive Greenbelt and Urban Farm program proposed through our new community. It's a 2-mile north-south connection and then connections east and west as well. And there are 3 levels of urban farming envisioned within the plan area. One is agminity, which would be distributed opportunities for micro farming and garden plots, community gardens for adjacent residents. The next level up is the ag tech or 10-acre urban farm that would be situated between a K through 8, a high school, and a community college campus. And then the next step up from that is the ag buffer, where we're hoping farmers could provide locally grown produce for our farmers market at the town center. Next slide, please. Another design criteria that's within the county's general plan, is the jobs housing balance. And this project, just given its location, is very well situated and is within over 200,000 existing jobs, within 5 miles, of over 200,000 existing jobs, which is twice the threshold identified in the county's performance criteria number 5. Plan proposes 1 million square feet of commercial mixed use and commercial on-site to allow some on-site jobs housing. And we think this is a good opportunity to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas. Next slide. The transportation mobility section of goal and policies are really critical to this project. We have, micro-mobility, one we're excited about, where, at first mile, last mile trip of jump bikes, jump before they were purchased by Line back in February. There's an article in the paper where Sacramento was the number 2 market in all of their markets in the world. And so it's a great opportunity to have bikes and provide micro-mobility. We also want to encourage hybrid and electric and micro-transit bus systems. And there's a lot of other aspects of the transit and mobility aspect of this plan. Next slide, please. Key concept number 7, sustainability. It really spans across all the topics that might be within a specific plan. We have an aspirational goal of being a net zero electric community. It actually hasn't been achieved on a community-wide basis. We're hoping to be the first. And we also need to be thinking about a habitat mitigation plan, which we provide on our own, as well as thinking about agricultural mitigation and other issues. Next slide, please. The project is also very well located and essentially embodies smart growth aspects, and that is adjacent to existing infrastructure. So there's an existing 24-inch water line that runs down El Centro Road and east on San Juan. And there's also existing sewer in that same location. And so this enables this project to tie in with the first phase of development pretty readily before having to front more infrastructure. It's also adjacent to existing roadways and freeway interchanges and would help support the investment that's happened nearby in the town center and the airport. Next slide, please. It also is within the city of Sacramento's American River place of use for water. So this will be the first project, I think, or only big specific plan project that'll be on surface water day 1. The next slide shows our land use plan. Again, it aims high. We want to meet or exceed all the criteria that are in the general plan. We have a goal of scoring 24 out of 24 and starting high. And we did make some changes through this process when we met with the community and adjusted down about 1,000 units of residential and about 2 million square feet of commercial. We have looked at the FACOG growth principles, and we think we check all of those 7 boxes there. I won't go into too much more detail on that, but we think we're consistent with the FACOG growth principles. Next slide, please. Our roadway master plan utilizes a modified grid to allow a high degree of connectivity, allow traffic to disperse efficiently. And we're also proposing a smart growth street for the West El Camino Main Street extension west from the interchange. So it's a key part of our town center. And you could go to the next slide, please. By having this grid system, we'll be able to shut down portions of that main street and have town, farmers markets and events in the town center area. We also have a very robust bicycle master plan. We've gathered comments from the Sacramento area, bicycle advocates and others, and we're looking to be a very bike-friendly community. One of the aspects of our plan is we have an existing I-80 freeway overchange or overcrossing with a bike lane that our plan can connect to at our eastern tip, and from there south along the Witter Canal and Garden Highway and Discovery Park open space, mostly through open space, it's a 5-mile or 20-minute ride to downtown. So if you're on an electric bike, you won't even break a sweat trying to get to downtown. Next slide, please. We also went through a series of proximity analyses. Again, all of these are in the application chapter. We just wanted to highlight a few. what we're trying to do is reduce the distance. So the county has a threshold of 1 mile from a number of amenities, 1 mile from schools. We looked at reducing it by half mile. And so if we take that sort of approach, it's going to make it more convenient for folks to walk and bike to things versus taking their car. Next slide, please. With the same thing with parks, how do we shift from having 95% of our units within 1 mile? Can we do better? And the answer is yes. We have 97% of our units within a quarter mile of a park site. Next slide. We also looked at this at the amenity. It shows the north-south greenbelt and urban farming corridor, as well as those easterly connections. Again, we have 98% of our units within a half mile of this urban farm greenbelt corridor versus the 1 mile. Next slide, please. We also looked at commercial, and so again, trying to make it very convenient for folks to walk or hop on a bike, and within 5 minutes be downtown at a coffee shop or visiting friends or having dinner without having to drive your car or worry about parking. Next slide, please. I may be jumping ahead here, but another key aspect is the proposed transit system. We have a figure-8 transit loop that loops through the town center, and with 8 or 10 stops, can reach most of our future residents. We have, the goal is to have 80% of the future residents within a half mile. We have 84% of our units within a quarter mile. So again, making it very convenient and easy for these future residents to walk to transit and get to downtown and get to points beyond, or ride their bike down to the Sac Valley station and catch a train or a bus to pretty much anywhere in Sacramento and the region. And with that, I'll yield to Nick.
Yeah, I just want to make a few closing comments here and obviously open up for questions and answers. I do want to touch on, it's very relevant in terms of the context of the first agenda item and as it relates to the housing needs of our region.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, next slide. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Aside from the land use characteristics, I think that make this area a logical place for future growth in the region. This is really the right project at the right time. Given the needs of housing in our region, as an example, I often tell people about, certainly we want to grow as close as we can to the urban core, to densify as much as we can. I know the city of Sacramento 10 years ago set a goal for itself, 10,000 units in 10 years. 10 years has passed, and we're nowhere near that goal, and our housing needs are even more acute than they were back then. And I do believe that this project presents a unique opportunity to provide a range of housing types for all income levels. And I do want to note that as part of the next phase of our project, we are seeking a development agreement, which also means that we'll be proposing an affordable housing strategy, which will acknowledge that new residential development does not always provide the housing necessary for those most in need, and we'll be exploring possibilities with county planning staff and SHRA on what this project can do to meet its sort of fair share of that. I do want to say that while Tim's presentation was a little long, there were a lot of details in there, but really it's to underscore the fact that this project meets or beats all the standards that have been set by the county for development in new master plan communities. And I think that was sort of recognized at the CPAC, who unanimously recommended that we go on to the next level, the next stage of the process. And that's really what we're here for today, is really to solicit feedback, provide another opportunity for public comment, but really start digging into further details in terms of the environmental analysis. We're still in the even though we've invested a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of consideration, there's still a lot of work to do. And the bulk of the work is during the environmental process, which will commence after this phase of the master planning process. So in any event, I appreciate your patience. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions or discussion?
This is Kara, and you sort of addressed my question was going to be, or first question was going to be really about the affordable housing component. So thank you for those comments. I do agree with you as we look at master plans And, in conjunction with our housing crisis and situations, proximity to jobs and transportation, especially when we're trying to fill those moderate, low, and extremely low income slots, is extremely important for those communities. So look forward to hearing more about that. I did have a question as you move potentially into the environmental review phase. And I don't know if there's a good answer to this because we're in this sort of unprecedented environment. Specifically, and this was brought up, I think, in one of the public comments that we received with respect to the traffic studies and maybe to a certain extent even habitat and species. Given the fact that we are, people are working from home, vehicle miles traveled and trips are not the same that they used to be. And, we've seen all these sort of, anecdotal stuff about species sort of returning to environments. How do you establish a baseline or how do you sort of anticipate, I'm assuming folks are thinking about this as projects are moving forward in this environment so that it can be accurate to what business as usual, hopefully if we get back to that at some point, looks like?
So Todd Smith here. I'll field that one, and then Nick, if you have anything to add, feel free. We recognize the challenge that I think one of the public commenters raised in their written comments regarding things like the levels of traffic and the associated reduction. With less traffic comes improved air quality. So that's a challenging thing to establish a baseline. We're going to be actually discussing that very issue with our traffic consultant once we get them under contract. It may be that there are various public data sources out there that we could utilize for traffic as one example, or other agencies that have that data readily available. I know Caltrans is doing some studies on the freeways in the area. They may have some information to share, but certainly that's going to be a challenge for not just this project, but other large projects that are going through at this time.
Thanks for that. I know it's an incredibly challenging thing to contemplate. So I appreciate your comments.
This is John Lindgren. I'd like to add, I'm senior planner. I work for Todd Smith. To clarify the data sources Todd's talking about, we would be intending to pull existing data that's pre-COVID so that we get a better representation of what business as usual traffic would look like, for example. So those data sources he was referring to would be trying to pull from existing pre-COVID data.
Okay.
This is Alan speaking. I do want to go on record and saying that I did talk to the applicant before this hearing. But one of the questions I'd like the applicant maybe to comment on is, there was quite a bit of comment about potential increase in traffic to the system, I-80 and all that. And then one of the comments I had was, since this is what everything that's going on in the environment, social justice and inequities in income levels and things like that. One of the big employers in the Sacramento region is the state of California, and that hovers around downtown. So to the extent that we want to have affordable housing inclusive that the applicant has mentioned, how does someone that needs affordable housing that is going to be provided here, how do they get to a $30,000, $40,000 job looking for the state of California downtown without impacting traffic? And if they don't have a car, or how do you promote social justice with this design?
So this is Nick Abdis, Commissioner Hama. We understand your comments, and we do share those concerns. I think from a social justice standpoint, I think providing an amenity-rich community that is provides varying housing types and reduces barriers to entry to facilitate families moving into good schools with rich amenities, including parks and open space, in our urban farm program. I mean, this is, certainly one of the driving goals of our master plan is to really be an inclusive master plan. So we believe through measures related to affordability by design, things like a car may really be marginalized in terms of a need that a family must have. Being so close to downtown, as Tim Denham articulated, you could, for example, take a bike ride to the Sac Valley Station. It would take you 15 to 20 minutes. And from there, hop on a bus or hop on light rail. Certainly we'll have a commuter bus access as well. So certainly reducing those barriers for individuals to live in a place like this certainly is a keystone to our thought process and visioning in this community.
Thank you. Yeah, because because we had quite a bit of discussion earlier on the previous item before this commission, is I think that's very important to inclusiveness and to have affordable quality of living. And you have a great opportunity here with a lot of diversity in terms of the amenities, and I would encourage you to exploit that opportunity.
We agree. Thank you.
This is Commissioner Tatishi. I have a question. And I also want to disclose that I did meet with the applicants at the request prior as well. So as you're looking to potentially move forward with the traffic studies, and I applaud the commitment to, transit and biking and pedestrian and all of that. But as you're connecting this potential project to the North Natomas and the Garden Highway, South Natomas areas, really there's only one overpass right now that connects from this project into that Garden Highway area, and a potential kind of pedestrian or bike overpass. Is this traffic study going to be looking at how whether or not that's going to adequately meet the needs to be able to connect all of these groups, especially if it's something that becomes a destination and more people need to be able to move in and out across these freeways that don't have a lot of overpasses at this point?
Yes, so this is Todd Smith responding. The transportation study is not intended to solely look at automobiles. We look at all modes of transportation, whether that's bikes, pedestrians, transit, and of course the vehicles. So we will be looking at what the project impacts are related to accessibility for transit, for bicyclists who could use the trail system that exists to get into downtown, whether those existing overcrossings represent a constraint depending on the magnitude of trips that are generated by all those various modes. That's definitely what we're going to be looking at.
Thank you.
This is Nick Abdis, too. If I may add to that, Commissioner Tatishi, appreciate the question because it's a very important one. Only we can say all we want about transit and bike and pedestrian friendliness, but the automobile still has a prominent place, certainly in our world. And the traffic study acknowledges that, but so does our land plan in the sense that we're also trying to minimize vehicle trips by designing opportunities for job growth within our project boundaries. We have approximately 3 million square feet of commercially designated property. So I just wanted to add that this is obviously a very important point. It's one that people care about. Traffic is bad right now on Garden Highway. Traffic is bad right now on I-80. And certainly our traffic study is going to be looking at all those issues and what our project would do to those existing facilities, and frankly, what additional improvements would be necessary to facilitate some level of service appropriate in the county's general plan for traffic. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we have additional questions for the applicant? Okay, I understand we have members of the public that would like to speak. Are they ready?
Yes, ma'am. We have 5 public speakers.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, caller. Hello, caller.
Yes, hello?
Yes. Would you please state your name for the record? Silence the meeting in the background on all devices. You have 3 minutes. Please start making your comment.
Okay, let me silence that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just silencing. Mute. Okay. Okay, hi, my name is Gibson Howell, resident on Garden Highway, and I have a few questions. First, as part of the county's general use plan, the urban service boundary, USB, is intended to be a permanent growth boundary, not subject to modification except under extraordinary circumstances. So I guess I'm asking, what are the extraordinary circumstances that would justify even starting an environmental review for this project to extend the urban service boundary? And then secondly, part of LU4 Strategy 2 says the county should give priority to residential development on vacant or underutilized sites within urban existing areas that have infrastructure capacity available. So my question would be has there been any indication that the county is running low on undeveloped space within the urban service boundary to meet the county's growth needs? And then lastly, just definitely echo the traffic concerns. We're talking about putting a similar number of people as there might be around a large intersection, like say in Roseville, 25 to 23,000 people. In Roseville, their freeway overpasses are like 6-lane overpasses, and they're extremely congested. West El Camino is, as everyone knows, just 2 lanes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Do we have a response or questions?
Todd Smith here. I can respond to 2 of the questions raised by Mr. Howell. The first one regarding the urban services boundary and the any justification for its expansion. At this time, we have not developed a justification for the expansion. That is something that we will have to get into as we move through the master plan process. Just for everyone's knowledge, the criteria for expansion of the USB is found in LU 127. That's the Land Use Element Policy 127 that allows for expansion of the urban services boundary based on a number of criteria. And I also want to let folks know that when we did the general plan update process back in 2011, when that was adopted, the Board of Supervisors placed an overlay on the land use diagram for the general plan, which is specifically for the Natomas Vision area at the time, and this project is included in that overlay area for the unincorporated Natomas community. So there has been some public expression of interest by the County Board of Supervisors to potentially develop portions of unincorporated Natomas over the last 10 to 20 years. Obviously, we're not there yet in terms of making a recommendation to expand the urban services boundary. This is merely for initiation of environmental review. To the second point regarding the potentially available land inside the urban services boundary, Yes, there is land available inside the urban services boundary. Commissioners, you may recall every year when we do our general plan annual report, we identify those existing, previously approved projects like North Vineyard Station Specific Plan, Florin Vineyard Gap Community Plan, and others that have a certain amount of available capacity. They are in various phases of build out, so there is remaining land available inside the urban services boundary. Those are my responses at this point.
Thank you. Okay, could we have the next caller, please?
Caller, please state your name for the record. Silence the meeting in the background on all devices. You have 3 minutes. Please start making your comment.
My name is Jasmine Shahbandi. I believe that the question that we're discussing today is the reimbursement agreement and whether the applicant, the developer, should be allowed to recover costs of the master planning effort from non-participating property owners that decide to urbanize their properties. In this case, I would be one of the non-participating property owners. In principle, I protest the funding agreements generally across the board. The funding agreement, for example, that was adopted on the 26th of February 2019. Very simply, I believe that these types of funding agreements favor developers that can afford the most generous funding amounts. My concern is that these agreements between developers and planners could lead to unethical relationships. Basically, the salaries of the planners are being paid in this case by the developers who are utilizing their services. And I just feel that there's just too much opportunity for conflict of interest. I brought this up at the February 26th meeting in 2019. I brought it up again after the meeting to Mr. Todd Taylor, who at that time told me adamantly that there would be no conflict of interest in this type of case. More recently, he also, when I called him and talked to him again about it, because of on the opportunity of this legal notice of public hearings, he referred me to the Natomas Community Planning Advisory Council. That is an opportunity for the community to have input and let's say the interest of the community. I mentioned to him at that time that the legal advisor for this project, Mr. Nick Avdi, who's also present, in this meeting, online meeting, was chair of that Natomas CPAC, that Natomas Planning Advisory Council, Community Planning Advisory Council, through 2019. And I do not see how that committee could have any legitimacy when the person who's chairing it is actually the legal representative of the developer. I don't feel that committee represents me as a result. I think that the elephant in the room here also, since we're discussing the merits of the project, is COVID-19. We have Arden Mall empty right up the road on the Garden Highway, and it might be a good opportunity to rethink just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have questions, or staff, do you have a response?
So it's Todd Smith again, responding to the question or the statement about the funding agreement. Funding agreements and reimbursement agreements are authorized in government code as it relates to preparation of specific plans and community plans like this. They are expressly, they include language in this case that expressly says the funding agreement does not warrant any particular outcome that favors an applicant. Staff's job is to remain objective and to use our general plan policies as a guide to shape the project to be consistent or not. In the case of a project like this that is going to be very challenging, we actually highlighted some of the challenges in the initiation board letter. We understand the perception that the commenter raised, but I do need to reassure the Commission that we strive very hard to maintain our objectivity. We are very careful not to put ourselves in a position that could be perceived as a conflict of interest.